Have you ever noticed how the world feeds men lies about attraction? You've probably been told women only want men with money, or that looks are the only ticket into her heart. But let me ask you something real. If that were true, why do you see powerful, wealthy men get left for someone who barely has anything but presence? Why do you see women falling for men who aren't the best looking in the room, but somehow capture her focus completely? The truth is, you've been misled, and those myths about female attraction are costing you connection, respect, and chances you didn't even realize were yours. Most men live under invisible chains because they believe these myths without questioning them. You're told to buy her gifts, to chase her endlessly, to compete with other men by flashing status symbols. But deep down, you've seen how these things don't last. They might catch her attention for a second, but they don't hold her. And every time you fail with these myths, you think the problem is you, when really, the problem is the script you've been following, a script written to keep you weak, distracted, and doubtful of yourself. Here's what most won't tell you. Attraction is psychological, not transactional. A woman's interest is built in the small moments where you show strength in silence, where you hold your ground without apology, where you let your presence, not your possessions, speak for you. Attraction is about how you make her feel in your energy, not what you put in her hands. But the painful part? Most men never figure this out because they're too busy believing in the myths. They pour years into chasing a fantasy of what they think women want, and then wake up bitter, confused, and alone when reality doesn't match. It's not that women are complicated, it's that you've been decoding the wrong signals. And as long as you stay trapped in these illusions, you'll keep repeating the same mistakes. You're here because you're ready to see through the lies. You're here because some part of you knows the truth doesn't match the stories you've been sold. And if you listen closely, I'll show you the hidden patterns that separate the men women desire from the ones they forget. Think about the last time you saw a woman give her full attention to a man. Maybe you noticed her eyes soften, her body leaning in, her laughter coming naturally. Did you assume it was because of his looks or his bank account? That's the myth talking. The real secret is far more subtle. He made her feel something beyond surface-level attraction. He triggered her instincts, not her material checklist. And once you understand this, you'll never look at interactions the same way again. One of the most dangerous myths men believe is that women are constantly measuring them against a list of requirements. Height, money, muscles, car. And yes, those things can draw a glance, but they don't create a bond. Women aren't machines where you insert a feature and get love in return. They're emotional beings wired to respond to energy, confidence, and leadership. If you walk into a room with quiet certainty, if you don't flinch under pressure, if you hold her gaze without fear, you've already done more to spark attraction than 100 men waving status in her face. But here's where so many men go wrong. They act like they're auditioning for approval. They chase, they perform, they over-explain themselves. Every move screams, "Please notice me, please like me." And women can feel that desperation instantly. Attraction dies the moment she senses you don't see yourself as enough. Because if you don't believe in your own worth, why should she? This is the myth that ruins men silently. They think attraction is about proving themselves worthy, when in reality, attraction begins when you stop seeking permission. Women test, women observe, and what they want to see is if you can stand unshaken. Not arrogant, not hostile, but steady, like you don't need her validation to breathe. That's the core truth hidden beneath all the lies. And the men who understand this? They don't beg for attention. They don't play games to look important. They create an aura that pulls women in without effort because their value doesn't need advertisement. When you start seeing yourself as the source of attraction, not the seeker of it, the myths lose power. And suddenly, you're playing the game from a position of strength, not weakness. Here's a bitter truth most men don't want to hear. Women aren't attracted to what you give them. They're attracted to what you reveal in yourself. Think about it. Gifts fade, compliments get forgotten, dinners disappear into memory, but the way a woman feels in your presence that stays carved into her instincts. And that's why so many men, despite doing everything right, still end up invisible. They're following myths that make them performers, not leaders. Take the myth of just be nice. Society repeats this like a mantra. If you're respectful, if you're agreeable, if you treat her like a queen, she'll be yours. But you've seen reality. You've seen men who bend over backwards for women get pushed into the dreaded friend zone. Why? Because attraction isn't built on comfort alone. Niceness without strength feels hollow. Women don't want a servant. They want a man who can make them feel safe and alive. A man who can respect them, but won't sacrifice his own spine in the process. Another myth? That women fall for chaos, the so-called bad boy image. Men see this and think they have to act reckless, detached, even cruel, to spark attraction. But here's the real reason that image works. It's not the bad behavior, it's the certainty. A man who doesn't need permission, who doesn't apologize for existing, who moves with conviction. That energy is magnetic. You don't need to play the role of a villain. You just need to embody the core truth. Women respect men who respect themselves. And maybe the most damaging myth of all is this: that you're powerless in attraction, that women hold all the cards and you're just waiting to be chosen. This lie has broken millions of men. It convinces them to shrink, to beg, to compromise themselves just for a chance at connection. But in reality, attraction is a two-way street. When you know your worth, you don't chase, you evaluate, you don't cling, you choose. And that shift in perspective alone flips the dynamic completely. Every time you buy into the myths, you step further away from who you actually are. And the tragedy is, most men never even get to experience what it feels like when a woman is truly drawn to them, not for what they do, but for who they are. That's the power hidden behind the lies. So how do you break free from these myths? The first step is to recognize the difference between attraction that is manufactured and attraction that is real. Manufactured attraction is built on tricks, buying attention, forcing conversation, overcompensating with things you think she wants. Real attraction is built on presence, the energy you carry without trying, the calm confidence that doesn't need performance. And this is where most men fail, because they've never been taught to trust their own presence. Picture this. A man walks into a room. He doesn't speak loudly. He doesn't flash wealth. He doesn't even dress to impress. Yet women notice him, not because of what he's doing, but because of what he's not doing. He's not seeking. He's grounded. He's aware, and he's not desperate for validation. That kind of presence is rare, and women are instinctively drawn to it, even if they can't explain why. But here's the catch. You can't fake presence. If you try to act confident while underneath you're anxious, women will sense it instantly. Attraction isn't about rehearsed lines or playing roles. It's about alignment between who you are inside and how you show up outside. That's why the men who keep believing myths never win. They're always out of alignment, chasing approval instead of living in their truth. The second way to dismantle myths is to stop playing the role of a contestant. Every time you put a woman on a pedestal, you unconsciously lower yourself. And women don't want to look down. They want to look across or even look up. When you learn to see yourself as equal, when you approach her as a man who has options and standards of his own, something changes. You stop radiating neediness and you start radiating choice. And that flips the attraction dynamic on its head. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or dismissive. True strength isn't about rejecting women. It's about not needing to prove yourself to them. When you embody that balance, myths lose their grip on you. You no longer fall for the lies about money, looks, or status being everything. Instead, you start realizing that attraction is about psychology, about energy, about how you make her feel in the deepest parts of herself. And once you've tasted that kind of authentic attraction, you'll never want to go back to the myths again. Here's the dark side of these myths that no one talks about. They don't just mislead men, they weaken them. Every time you chase a woman with money, with status, with overgiving, you're programming yourself to believe that you are not enough on your own. That's why so many men burn out emotionally. They keep investing energy into proving themselves, and when it doesn't work, they feel emptier than before. This cycle isn't accidental, it's the very trap society wants you to fall into. Think about it. If men believe women only want money, what happens? They work themselves to exhaustion, sacrificing health, peace, and joy in the hope of being chosen. If men believe looks are everything, they live in insecurity, constantly comparing themselves to others, never satisfied. If men believe they must endlessly please women, they erase their own desires and lose their identity. These myths don't create attraction, they create dependency. And a man who is dependent can never truly lead, never truly attract, never truly feel free. Women sense this weakness immediately. They might take advantage of it for attention or benefits, but they don't respect it. Respect is the foundation of attraction, and without it, you're just background noise in her life. That's why some men get ghosted after giving everything, while others barely try and still hold her focus. It's not about fairness, it's about psychology. The most dangerous part is this: the longer you live by these myths, the harder it becomes to see yourself clearly. You start believing the lies so deeply that you forget who you were before them. You stop walking like a man and start begging like a child. That's why breaking free isn't just about dating, it's about reclaiming your strength. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you felt truly confident in front of a woman, without overthinking every word or move? If you can't remember, that's the cost of believing in attraction myths. They strip you of the natural magnetism you already had and replace it with endless self-doubt. But here's the truth: once you strip those myths away, once you see that attraction is not about what you do, but about who you are, you stop playing the weak man's game. And that shift doesn't just change how women see you, it changes how you see yourself. So how do you rebuild yourself into a man who doesn't need myths, tricks, or fake masks? It begins with one word: alignment. Alignment between your values, your actions, and your presence. When a man is aligned, women feel it immediately. He doesn't need to force attraction. It radiates naturally, like gravity, and that's the kind of energy no myth can compete with. Start with your standards. Most men have none. They approach every woman as if she's above them, desperate to prove they're worthy. But real attraction begins when you flip that script. Ask yourself, does she even meet my standards? Does she respect me, listen to me, bring value into my life? When you start screening women instead of begging for them, your energy changes. You go from the pursuer to the prize, and women instinctively respond to that shift. Next, presence. A man with presence doesn't rush, doesn't fidget, doesn't fill silence with nervous words. He allows stillness. He's comfortable in his own skin. That calmness is magnetic because it signals control, control over himself, control over the moment. Women don't crave men who lose themselves under pressure. They crave the ones who can hold steady when everything feels uncertain. And then, purpose. A man without purpose is like a ship without a compass. He drifts, hoping someone else will steer him. But women are drawn to men who are already on a path, men who don't need a relationship to feel complete. That doesn't mean you ignore her. It means she joins your journey instead of becoming your only destination. That difference is what separates leaders from followers in attraction. Here's the paradox: the less you try to prove yourself, the more attractive you become. Because the moment you stop acting like you need her, you free her to want you. She feels your independence, your stability, your depth, and that creates an emotional pull stronger than any myth ever could. This is why myths crumble when you live in alignment. You no longer fall for the lie that money or looks are everything. You realize that the core of attraction is energy, authenticity, and strength. And once you step into that truth, you stop being the man who chases and start being the man who chooses. Now let me leave you with the truth most men will never hear. Women are not as mysterious as the world makes them seem. They're human, driven by instinct, emotion, and the need to feel safe, yet alive. The myths keep you blind because they make attraction sound like a game you can't win, when in reality, you've always had the power. The problem is, you've been told to hand that power away. Think back on your life. How many times did you shrink yourself just to be acceptable? How many times did you overgive, overpraise, or overchase, only to be ignored? Those weren't failures of who you are. They were failures of the myths you were following. The pain you felt wasn't rejection of your soul, it was rejection of the lies you were told to live by. That's why some men keep repeating heartbreaks. They never rewrite the script. But here's where everything changes. When you stop believing attraction is about performance, you stop begging. When you stop believing women hold all the cards, you stop fearing. And when you stop worshipping myths, you finally see yourself clearly. Women don't want a perfect man. They want a man who knows himself, who owns his flaws, who doesn't break under pressure. That man, the real man, doesn't compete with myths. He destroys them. This is your wake-up call. Attraction is not about being the richest, the tallest, or the flashiest. It's about the way you carry yourself, the way you believe in yourself, and the way you refuse to be reduced to a checklist. That is what makes you unforgettable. And once you understand that, the myths lose all their power over you. So let me ask you something personal. Which myth about attraction has cost you the most in your life? Was it believing you weren't handsome enough, or that you didn't have enough money, or that being too nice would guarantee love? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this message hits something inside you, don't just keep it for yourself. Like this video, subscribe for more truths they don't want you to know, and share it with a friend who needs to hear it tonight, because every man deserves to break free from the lies and step into his real power.